Grab your Bibles, turn to Daniel 4. We're going to look at verses 34 to 37 from Daniel. Daniel's that, you get into the major prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. Daniel is what we call the start of the minor prophets. That's your Sunday school lesson for this morning. The word of the Lord. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lift up my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the hosts of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stand his hand or say to him, what have you done? At the same time, there you go. God's comforting sovereignty. Got so much running through my mind this morning. How are you about that this morning? Feel like a lot of things are racing, going through your mind? The tension of the Christmas season's getting there. There's shopping to be done, right? Christmas presents to be bought. How many of you are already planning menus? A couple hands went up, not as many as I thought. Well, you're not related to my wife. She'd already have Christmas dinner already planned by now in her mind. So how does your life feel right now? I mean, there's a lot going on in the world and in our country. How does your life feel right now? I love routine. I love routine that is organized but flexible. So therefore, I allow for interruptions in my day. But I love my routine. Sue, however, was the creative personality, the artistic, flared one, who she would transition from project to project without even thinking about it, kind of. She would go from cross-stitching to knitting to crocheting to stamping to card making to rug latching, to things, cutting out things for quilts. I'm trying to think. Any type of home crafting project, like she redid our countertops using construction paper and Elmer's glue, and they look like a fake leather, and they look really nice when sealed. She did basket weaving. And she would just move from project to project, and the projects are scattered all through the house as I try to bring routine to my life, right? Because routine is my way of keeping order in my life. So living with Sue could be hectic at times because she seemed to be just going any which way. But that's only till you got to really know her. Because once you got to know her, you knew that she was a planner. And what would happen is she was moving from project to project because there was always something around the corner. There was a Christmas present to be made. And she knew that if she was going to make those Christmas tree ornaments for the grandkids, which she was doing almost every year for a season, she started in June. And she'd work so much on them, get tired of that, move to something else, because there was a birthday that now had to be done, and a gift had to be made, or something around the house had to be done. But every time she made a transition, she was doing it with a plan. The planning is what kept her life under control. Matter of fact, the times that she would get the grumpiest were times when that plan would get derailed unexpectedly by something. Some of you are probably like that, right? You're planners. I know a couple of you here are planners. And you probably hate time delays. You probably hate it when supplies can't come in on time. You don't like interruptions because you have a plan. But what happens when your life is suddenly turned completely upside down and inside out? What happens when the routine of your life is abruptly disrupted? Or the planning that you love to do that gives some semblance of order to your life is now had to be thrown away because that plan is completely shattered in the events of life. When the heart failure team came into the room, we say, first off, is it just me or is that a scary title? Heart failure team. That's how they introduce themselves. Well, we're the heart failure team here at the University of Washington Medical Center. Okay, we're in trouble. What happens when they're standing there telling your loved one? You ready? You're not leaving the hospital for a while. You see, we don't know when you're going to leave your hospital yet. We don't know how to solve the problem that your heart is failing presently. No, you can't go home, because that was the planner asking the question. No, you can't go home because if you have another heart incident, you'll never make it back here. And about that time, your personal cardiologist walks in, who's the head of the department, endowed chaired professor at the University of Washington Medical School, who has been your personal friend now for 6+ years as you battle heart conditions, right? Walks in and he says, you know, that day we talked about would come eventually that we'd have to have a conversation about what all the other options are for your treatment. Today's that day. What do you do? We're going to run some tests. We're going to do some procedures. And the heart failure team here, I trust them, they're going to come back with a game plan that we'll sit down and talk about. In those moments, when the routine of your life is now completely derailed, or the plan of your life is completely yanked out of your control and has been obliterated, what do you do? See, the deepest longing of that moment is for you and I, in those situations, when we confront those things, we want to get back to our routine. We want to get back to the plan of our life. We want to get back to some semblance that we have control. But all you can do there is listen to some doctors, let them run some tests, and wait, and wait, and wait, and wait some more. Impatient people, by the way, do not do well waiting on doctors and tests because they're out of your control. There's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing your family can do about it. There's nothing really the doctors can do about it except for do what they're doing, running the tests. In those moments, what do? When hardship, suffering, pain, brokenness, the world falling apart moments hit your life, they capture your attention. You see, I think we live our lives with a myth. We live in the myth that we actually have control over the events in our life, over the people in our lives, over the course of history. We really believe that we can change history. Let's give you a couple examples. We believe that eating right, proper exercise, getting a good night's rest, getting a little less stress in your life will lead to good health and long life, and you really won't have any medical problems. One of the most healthiest people I know hit retirement. He had kept himself in great shape, ran miles upon miles and mountain climbed and rode his bike almost every day. Within months after retirement, has terminal cancer. He controlled his life, didn't he? Shouldn't he have a good retirement? We've bought into the pattern of thinking that if we parent well and we raise our kids right, that they will grow up and have a great life and nothing bad will ever happen to them, and we'll have these wonderful grandchildren who are just as perfect. And when one of them all of a sudden rebels and goes their own way and does their own thing, you're shocked, right? That myth goes down the drain. What about the myth that you work hard, save your money, invest well, you have good financial advice, and therefore you hit the future with a nice retirement plan, you're ready to travel the world and relax and just have a leisurely, carefree days. The golden years. Yeah. We live under the notion that making good decisions, well-reasoned, thoughtful decisions, informed with good data, that we can keep control of our life and do well. We believe that we really have the power to control it. And if you think I'm a little off base because you think, yeah, we can control it, let me just ask you a question, because I do think some of you are going to say, well, that's not really true in my life. I know that there's a God out there and he's in charge. I just want to know why there is so many self-help books at the bookstore or in the library. And why every third infomercial, it seems like, on the internet or on cable TV is what? A self-help program. Because if you just get the right information and make the right decisions, your life will be okay. Nothing bad's going to happen to you. And in some ways and somehow, we have bought into that myth. Hardship, suffering, pain, brokenness, a world falling apart. In those moments, they have a cataclysmic way of shattering our lives and turning our world upside down. And they have a way of saying to us, you are really not in control of your life. Awful quiet in here. Paul Tripp, I've been thinking about this in his book on suffering, uses this phrase, and I'm just, wow, it just baffles me. I'm really thinking about it hard this week because it stirs a lot of images in my mind. He uses the term our self-sovereignty. One who is sovereign is one who has absolute power or control over something, right? A sovereign king has absolute power and control over the rules and people in his country. Self-sovereignty is the fact that we declare that we have the supreme power or authority over our life. The authority to control our life, the authority to govern our life. And we believe that we even have the authority and the power to govern those who are in our sphere of influence. Because I've done all the research. They should listen to me. And ultimately, that is one of the reasons why we struggle trusting God. Because in our self-sovereignty, we are not willing to surrender our allegiance to God in every area of our life. We let him have a little control of this over here and maybe something down over here. But this part I have under control, and I'm going to be self-sovereign. I had a few children that I raised, 5 to be exact, and at times they would act as self-sovereigns until they found out that there was someone who was more sovereign in the house. And her name was Susan Wilson. Oh, yeah. Sue would used to say to him, you might not listen to me, and you might be angry at me right now, but you are going to do this because I know where you sleep at night. And she said it with the smile to beat all smiles. You see, our kids think that they're self-sovereign until a parent steps up and says, no, in this house, I'm the sovereign. And that's the same way it is in our world. We love to live in self-sovereignty until a struggle hits our life. And all of a sudden, we're out of control because the medical crisis is now greater than we could ever imagine. The economic crash is wiping out our savings. The election results are not what we wanted, and we're frustrated and angry. Our children don't live as we taught them to live, and they're frustrating us. Or maybe it's a natural disaster, a flood that wipes out the foundation of your house, or a volcano that erupts, or a tornado or a hurricane that strikes. Or heavy snow in the mountains creates greater spring runoff, and your community is now flooded underwater. these events disrupt our lives. And in the process, our sense of control is torn apart into pieces. Paul Tripp writes, hardship confronts us with our tendency to assume that we are in greater control than we really are because we think we take greater than we are because we think we are. We take away more credit for the good things in our lives than we should. So we take credit for when good things happen. That helps feed our self-sovereignty. And as I thought about that and read that quote in the book, immediately my mind sprang to Deuteronomy 8. And in Deuteronomy 8, Moses is telling the generation that's going to go into the land of promise, right? It says, you're going to get there. God's telling you that you're going to move into good homes. And you're going to harvest the land that's already been planted and the vineyards that have already been put there and the orchards that have already put there. And you're going to benefit from all the work of someone else because the God is giving that to you. But you're going to have some success, start to accumulate a little bit of wealth and some comfort, and you're going to think you're in control of your life, and all of a sudden, you're going to say in your heart, my power and the might of my hands have gotten me this wealth. And you will forget the Lord your God. Self-sovereignty does that to us. Self-sovereignty controls us. But you know, the opposite of that is true too. Because the opposite of that says that when things go bad, we blame ourselves too much. If I had just gotten my child to the doctor sooner, maybe they wouldn't have gotten this illness. Or maybe if I had prepared better for the flood, we wouldn't have lost most of the house. Whatever it is. We sometimes look at things that are far beyond our control, especially the people around us who are outside of our control, and we blame ourselves because we think we should have controlled the whole situation. When we just have to accept the fact that some things are beyond our control. And because we live in a fallen world, some of the things that happen to us will not always be good. They might even be cataclysmically bad. You see, and I think it goes back to this. We have forgotten one important detail in the story of creation with Adam and Eve. See, Adam and Eve were not the creators. They were the created. They were creatures created by God. And actually, God created them, and then he looked at them, and he looked at the garden, and he says, you know, guys, here's what I want you to do. You become the resident managers of this place for me. So all they are really are hired hands to do God's will and do God's purposes. But somehow they thought they were actually the sovereign rulers of the garden and did their own thing. Just like you and I do our own thing. You see, what we have to remember is Adam and Eve were not created for independent, self-sufficient living, but for rather dependent, others-reliant living. We are created to live in community. We are created to need the help of other people. We are created especially to need the help of our Creator. We are created to live inside of certain rules and to follow and live out certain purposes for someone who is greater than us. But we get ourselves in trouble when we forget that we do not have this power to supply all our needs, that we are placed in a world that will not submit to our demands, to our commands, or do our bidding as we think it should be done. We have very little power over creation. And what happens is our self-sovereignty becomes an idol. In claiming to be wise, they became fools because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator who is blessed forever. Amen. Did you catch that? They exchanged the truth to worship themselves. Self-sovereignty. But suffering has a reality check in the midst of all that. Because you think you have this world under control and you're sovereign and everything's cool, but all of a sudden in those moments when everything has been pulled out from underneath you, the proverbial rug is now out from underneath your feet, and you are kind of falling down, you have time to reflect. And as you scan and ponder, you quickly realize that there's very little that you have control of in your life. We are quickly confronted with that cold, hard truth. And what that does for us is brings fear into the equation. Because all of a sudden now we're fearful of what the future holds and how we're going to get through this. Are we going to be okay? And in that moment, you have reached a crisis of belief. Are you going to abort your self-sovereign independence and surrender your allegiance to one who is far greater than you, who loves you beyond measure, who loves you with no prerequisites, who loves you just the way you are, broken, hurting, suffering, living in an upside-down, inside-out world? He loves you even though your life is all messed up. And he loves you without hesitation. So how do you find hope in those moments, right? You need a word of encouragement today? Because you're awful quiet, you know. You're tracking with me, I can tell, but it's quiet. Do you know hopelessness is the only doorway to hope? Think about that for a minute. Hopelessness is the only doorway to hope. The only way that you can have hope that there is a solution to your problem or there is comfort in the midst of your pain is to get to the point where you have to say, I give up, I have no control over anything. And it's then that you all of a sudden can see the presence of a Jesus who is standing there with his arms wide open saying, hey, I'm here for you. Why don't you just come over here and let's embrace? Because I love you with an everlasting love. And the joy and the peace and the contentment and the solution that you're looking for that you can't find in your own soft, sovereign world is standing there waiting to give it to you all if only you'll come into his presence and believe in him and trust him with your life. Hopelessness leads to the hope of discovering the resurrected one who has loved you from eternity past to eternity future. Will you trust him? And so that's where we come to Daniel, because Daniel answers the questions for us about who's in control. Nebuchadnezzar was a sovereign king who believed in self-sovereignty. He was the man. His armies were terrorizing the then known world. His kingdom was growing. His treasury coffers were being filled to overflowing. And he went on an expansion plan in Babylon of greater proportions than you could ever imagine as he built this city in its glorious state of his reign. And we know that the Hanging Gardens, or the Hanging Library, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, was considered one of the 7 great wonders of the ancient world. The architectural and mechanical engineering that it took to make that happen are outstanding. He could do what he wanted. Nations feared him. He was in charge. People bowed down before him, including other nations. And there he was sitting on the throne with the power of life and death at his disposal. But Daniel writes, God wanted Nebuchadnezzar, who was believing his press clippings in the Babylonian times, who was really the sovereign king of the universe. And so that's the story of the early part of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Because quickly Daniel lets him know that Nebuchadnezzar, even people who are hostile to my power like you, are under my control. and under my power. And you're my pawn to do whatever I want. Quickly in chapter 1, we discover the king can only win victories when God allows him to defeat the people of God. God only allows him to understand the dreams in Daniel 2 and Daniel 4, those chapters, when God's servant Daniel tells him the answer, because God told Daniel the answer. Otherwise, the king, for all his power, was clueless. He also learned that God's sovereign power extended to those who refused to worship the king, and when he threw them into a fiery furnace to be punished, what happened? Their clothes didn't even smell like smoke, no hair was scorched on their head, and what happened? Nebuchadnezzar saw a fourth person when he only threw 3 in there who was walking around, and he says he looks like he's the Son of God. In the midst of your fiery furnace, I just want you to know that guess who shows up? His name is Jesus. In his self-sovereignty, pride flooded Nebuchadnezzar's heart. His accomplishments became his idols, and he boasts. Is not this great Babylon which I have built on my mighty power as a royal residence and for my glory or my majesty? Look at all I've done, man. Patting himself on the back. You know what happened to Nebuchadnezzar? For the next 7 years, he wandered around Babylon as a raving wild man animal. He was so strong that nobody could really subdue him. So if a coup was trying to be brought apart, he was too strong. He'd defeat anybody who tried to assassinate him. And he wandered around like this, eating of the earth, the grass and plants and trees for 7 years. But when he returns to his senses, he is praising God and acknowledging the sovereignty of Daniel's God, the God of heaven. And see, and that's where we are. When we run out of answers, when we lose control in our world, the only one to turn to and the only one to trust is the living God. The rest we need, the peace we long for, doesn't come from any knowledge. It doesn't come from our understanding of our dilemma. It really doesn't. But that's what we seek, isn't it? How many of us want to know why we are in the mess we're in? Instead, what Jesus wants us to know is, let me fill you with my presence. Come know me. We'll do this together. That's what I love about what Paul writes to the church at Ephesus in the 3rd chapter. He writes, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. What God wants for you in the midst of that struggle, in the midst of that hardship, is to discover his presence and discover his love so that you may experience the fullness of God in every corner, every nook and cranny of your life. See, comfort does come from God's grace. We've talked about that. Comfort comes from God's presence. But comfort also comes in knowing the one who's in charge. In the midst of your suffering, who you need to know is the one who knows all things, who rules all things. God does not lack understanding of your dilemma and your situation. By the way, he is never confused. He never has doubts. He has no unsolved mysteries that he has to unlock before he can answer your questions. He is the one who gives hope. Because our hope is not found in answering all the questions related to our dilemma and related to our situation or our problem, but our hope is found in running into the sovereign arms of a king whose presence is there for you and who's guaranteed to walk with you, protect you, and sustain you, even when life doesn't feel worth living anymore, he says, that's all right. I'm there with you. He's the one who comes alongside and weeps with you and cries with you. His presence is always there. He's the sovereign king over the universe. And Nebuchadnezzar got it. He really did. Because he says, for his dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. And that's the first thing you need to know about the sovereignty of God. God's rule over your life. It's from eternity past to eternity future. There is no time that God is not in charge. There's not a moment of your life, no matter how bad it feels, no matter how the world is being turned upside down, that God is not in charge of every detail of your life. Simply put, his will is always done. His plans always succeed. We don't know why sometimes he takes us down to the pits of hell to change us and transform us and get our attention. But it's part of his plan because he's in charge. Because he wants to redeem your life. By the way, everything in all creation heeds his voice, his commands. That's why on a storm-tossed sea, Jesus could say, be still. And all of creation stood still. Nebuchadnezzar put it this way: all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted for as nothing, and he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand or say to him, what have you done? You see, there's never a time in life when you can't go to God for help. He is always capable of helping you. Next, God's rule is global. God's sovereign rule is global. And so we go to the psalmist for a second, Psalm 139. Where shall I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, your right hand shall hold me. That's true. Notice that whatever's going on in your life, whatever bend in the road you're facing, no matter what the medical crisis is, the economic crisis, the parenting crisis, the crisis of aging parents, your employer being not so lovable and likable, whatever it is, there is not a time in your life where God isn't holding your hand and taking care of you, that his presence isn't with you. You see, when he says, you go through the valley of the shadow of death, you don't have to fear, because what? I am with you. His rule is global. There's not a place in time and history that you can go that he's not already there. So he's there in the valley of death. He's there in the good times as well. But God's rule, his sovereign rule, is also personal. I love it when the psalmist writes, the boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Why? Because God is good to my life. And isn't that what Psalms 23, David writes? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Why? Because he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. We have to understand that shepherds live with their sheep. And in living with their sheep, they got to know their sheep. And Jesus promises to live with you, his sheep. The whole reason that Jesus came to earth, and the reason why we remember it through the Advent season up through Christmas, is because God decided that it wasn't just important enough to redeem you, because that was one of the purposes. The most important purpose, I believe, was to establish a personal relationship with you so your redemption has meaning. What good is it if you just say your life is redeemed, you turn and you're walking in the other direction, but you haven't really said, Jesus, come with me and be my friend and be my guide? You and I were created to live in dependent relationships. And the most dependent relationship we live in is the one we have with our God. We need him. Even when we think we're self-sovereign and we don't need him, the reality of the truth is we need him. And he wants to be the personal God that fills your life. The sovereignty that he exercises in you is living in you. So in simple terms, what does that mean? So I've given you a little theology. Let me simplify it. There you are in the midst of your crisis. What does it mean? God is reachable. God is touchable. He is there with you in your suffering. He is listening to your cries. He hears the anguish of your heart. When you toss and turn through a sleepless night, he tosses and turns with you. When you shed a tear, he sheds a tear. God's sovereignty assures us of this, that we are not alone. He is with us because he's a personal God who cares for us. By the way, God's sovereign rule also is reflected in his character because his rule reflects his character. God is consistent. You and I may not be consistent. I know I say I have these values I live my life by that are character traits, things I want people to see in me that reflect Jesus Christ. And there are times some of you could say, well, he didn't really do it on that occasion. And you're absolutely right, because we're all there. But guess what? God is always true to his character. So what that means for us is if he says, I am love, everything he does in his rule over our life is going to be done because he loves us. And you're thinking, why am I going through hell on earth? Well, because God loves us and there's a plan. Don't know what the plan is, but there's a plan. And sometimes he doesn't share with us the plan because we're not ready to hear the plan. So he has to shape our character. His rule, because of love, is also full of wisdom. He will never betray his grace. He will never stop being merciful to us. His rule will reflect his holiness and his glory. Love what Nebuchadnezzar said. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are right and his ways are just. Here is a man who just spent 7 years as a raving idiot running around the world making a fool of himself, or at least around his town, making a fool of himself, and everybody laughing and mocking him, and yet he says, his ways are right and they're just. The guarantee that this means for me is that no matter what we're facing, no matter how bleak it looks, God is trustworthy. God keeps his promises. God's sovereign rule also benefits us. God in his grace is willing to use his power and his presence, his authority, to directly benefit our lives. His redemptive power extends to all areas of our life. And that is why the psalmist writes that the promise of God, right, the desire for God for us is that we experience the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. That our salvation is not just for the good times in heaven, but for the benefits of living in his presence and living in relationship with him in the nasty here and now of this world, to experience the goodness of God. And that's why I think James says it so well when James says, what does he say? You remember? Consider it all joy when you face trials and tribulations. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfast have its full effect, that you might be perfect, complete, or mature, actually, lacking in nothing. God's talking about taking a person here who is unstable, wanting to do their own things, who is living a self-sovereign life, and all of a sudden he's turning it around and saying, when you're going through trial, I'm shaping your life because I want you to be a diamond, and right now you're just a rough-cut rock. and I'm going to polish you. And polishes he does. When things are spinning out of control of your life, in the middle of the chaos surrounding Sue, I'll go back to being personal here. There was no routine. There's no control. Every one of Sue's plans for the future were gone. They were out of her control and my control. But they were not out of God's control. Because in those moments, in those last 18, 19 days of Sue's life, the planner, who would get extremely agitated when things didn't go her way in the planning of the routine, and you were derailing her, I just want you to know that her husband of 26 years, 7 months, 21 days, saw a different woman there. Because there was a peace of God that was flooding her life that is unexplainable. That same peace was flooding my life at the same time, so I kind of recognized it. But to watch her talk with these doctors when they were holding the power of her life in their hand regarding her heart, and to be calm and not agitated, is because of the comforting presence of a sovereign God who was in control of that moment, even when no one else had control of that moment. Because I love the doctors there at the U. They're outstanding. They loved my wife. They cared for her. They worked their tails off. But even they weren't in complete control because she went through a successful surgery. They were doing jumping jacks. They were so excited when they saw me. His surgery went so well. And the next day she has an unexplainable stroke. Because the sovereign God of the universe said, Sue, it's time to come home. And they're amazed and baffled because it was out of their control. And sometimes that's what we do. In our self-sovereignty, we want to live our life in control. And God just puts you through the ringer because he wants to let you know that you're not in control. But in his love and grace and mercy, he is in control. And he has what's best for your life. He has a plan and a purpose. And all he's asking you to do is to surrender your self-sovereign attitude and say, Jesus, I love you. I believe in you. I swear my allegiance to you is the God who's in control of my life. And in those moments, God works and moves. But we have to give up control and allow him to be in control. That's really why Jesus came to earth, to be the incarnation of God in flesh, is so that the self-sovereign control of our life could be obliterated at a cross, so that the sovereign control of a God can live within you for your good, for your blessing, to have the deep personal relationship with your Creator, who is and always will be blessed forever. Amen. And God is inviting you into that relationship. He invites you today and every day to continually give your life to him. Will you surrender your control? And will you trust him with your life?